This
you're going to get
conference will now be recorded.
thank you. You're going to get to watch this. You can send a link of this film to your family and friends to inform them. It's a great interview. One of the things that America has forgotten and lost sight of, and we've talked a lot about this on this program, is the Judeo-Christian values that America was founded upon. Without those values, without teaching those things to our children and our children's children, we do a huge disservice to them and to the future of this republic. And so you've heard me quote Judges 2:10 often, where the scripture states that there arose a generation who knew not the Lord and what he had done for Israel. Well, we could honestly take that scripture and we could apply it to the United States of America, a nation that was founded by Jews and Christians. Many Christians do not know that Haym Salomon, who was a wealthy Jewish financier, bankrolled the American Revolution for George Washington. There were 1,500 that we know of, 1,500 soldiers who fought, Jewish soldiers who fought in the American Revolution. Of course, the biblical perspective of Judaism giving Christianity its birth. And so there's a lot of connections there. The Toro Synagogue, the congregants of the Toro Synagogue after the American Revolution wrote a letter to George Washington because they were concerned about their well-being in this newly formed United States. And they said to Washington that, revolutions don't usually bear well for the Jewish community. And George Washington actually went to them and spoke to them personally and assured them that anti-Semitism would not be tolerated in the United States, that even our Jewish communities would find a safe haven, a safe tree to reside, or a vine to reside under. These are so important. It's so important that we understand this because that helps us to understand the context of what we are facing today. Most recently, I know you all have probably seen some of the statements coming out about now the Black Lives Matter movement, the Antifa movement are now calling for death to Israel, death to America. And of course, we've seen this even with the Islamists. We've seen they've been very clear about eliminating the Saturday people and the Sunday people, the pigs and the apes, the great Satan and the little Satan. And of course, we have, because of education, because we've lost control of our education that we didn't even know we were losing control of until we found that textbook years ago. But we have not been teaching our children an accurate perspective of history. The history that we've taught our children is historically inaccurate. It's been biased, and it does not reflect the Judeo-Christian values that our nation was founded upon. And those Judeo-Christian values are what afford us the freedom that we all share, no matter what faith background people come from, no matter what race. Our country has always enabled people to come and live here freely. We all on this call are probably descendants of ancestors who came to America to find a better way or to provide a better future for their family, for their posterity. And so that's why education is so critically important. And the topic that we are going to address tonight is equally. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to just introduce you before we start the video presentation. I want to tell you a little bit about Josh Reinstein. And I will also tell you that Josh and I have worked together for 15 years, over 15 years. When we first got involved, PJTN first got involved in educating Christians, and we decided to do this because after my first trip to Israel in 2003, as an evangelical Christian, the Bible came to life for me. And I saw the connectedness in the text of scriptures, and it helped me to understand my role, understanding what Israel's history was, and understanding her fight for her ancient homeland. And for those of us that are Bible-believing Christians, we know that God made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants that was eternal. And we know that eternal means forever. It doesn't stop. And unfortunately, there are too many people politically, and even Christians, unfortunately, are falling into the trap of replacement theology. They're anti-Zionist. And you know what's so frightening about that is that God is a Zionist. His holy mountain is Zion. So you have Christian leaders who are promoting false teachings. They're false prophets that are out there. And it's so critically important that we understand our role as Christians in light of the day. And we're going to talk about, you're going to hear me talk about that with Josh. But Josh has been the director of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus since its inception on January 5th, 2004, and is also the president of the Israel Allies Foundation. Mr. Reinstein is the producer and founder of the hit TV show Israel Now News. And Israel Now News is a half-hour weekly news magazine that is broadcast to millions of viewers around the world. Josh Reinstein grew up in Dallas, Texas, and Toronto, Canada. He is a graduate of the University of Western Ontario, where he earned a degree in political science. He served as a tank gunner in the elite 188 unit of the Israel Defense Forces Armed Corps. He currently lives in Jerusalem with his wife, Rebecca, and 4 children. Mr. Reinstein was named as one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post. So it is a tremendous honor to have him on the program. And Hannah, if you will go ahead, and I'm going to hit share screen.
Correct.
And we are looking for, okay. Can you all see that screen?
Not yet, Laurie.
Okay, let me try one more time.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this conference will now be recorded. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to a dear
Can you
friend
pause
of
that,
mine,
Laurie?
Josh Reinstein, with the Christian Allies Caucus. And Josh and I have been
There you
friends and working together to defend Israel for many, many years. And Josh is a respected leader, a respected go-to, and now an author. And of course, he's authored a book that has piqued my interest. And those of you who tuned in, you saw on your link in the email a link to.
Hannah, are you all seeing this?
We're not seeing it, we're hearing it. I saw the screen a second ago. Can you hit screen again down at the bottom of your go-to application?
Yeah, let me try it one more time. Okay.
There we go. Now you just hit play.
Okay, very good. All right, here we go.
Book, which is critically important for this hour. You know, at PJTN, we have been out across the country talking about the issue of the threat that we face here in the United States of America because of the indoctrination in our public school system. And unfortunately, that indoctrination is not just in our public schools. The propaganda is also within our churches. And unless we study history, history is so important, ladies and gentlemen. If we do not study history, then we are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. And so, unfortunately, many, many Christians, and you know our mission at PJTN is to focus on Christians. We don't focus on, you know, the people who are politicians, political leaders. We focus on Bible-believing Christians, because Bible-believing Christians read their Bibles and they know what God says about Israel. They know the covenant. They know the promise. And unfortunately, many Christians have forgotten. And yes, there are Christian leaders who are pushing replacement theology, which does not provide a foundation for Christians to understand what is biblically happening. And Josh did a great job in connecting not just the spiritual and the biblical components, but even the political realm, so that we can see and understand its manifestation. So Josh, the author of Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, the Power of Faith-Based Diplomacy. Josh, welcome to the program. We're delighted to have you today.
Thank you, Laurie.
Absolutely. So Josh, I was amazed reading through your book, and I want to encourage all of our viewers to order a copy. They can order a copy at Amazon, because you have done an outstanding job of pulling history, biblical history, and archaeology, the evidence of Israel's historic rights to ancient homeland together and encapsulated in this one book for such a time as this, talking about President Trump. And as our viewers know, we are a nonprofit organization. We cannot endorse candidates, but we do push the issues that drive people to vote. And if there was ever an issue that should drive Christians to the voting booth, should be registered. And we know that the last presidential election, over 40 million Christian women did not vote. And for whatever reason they set out, they didn't participate in this important process. But Josh, you made an outstanding argument for this, why Christians should be voting. And of course, in this book, it's absolutely fabulous. I want to talk to you a little bit about the issue of the biblical versus the political. As I said, we have always focused on the biblical aspect so that Christians understand what their role is in their generation. So Josh, tell us a little bit about the biblical versus the political aspect and how those two connect.
Well, I think what's interesting about the book, Laurie, is that we actually mesh the two. We show that if you understand the Bible, that you can understand the newspaper, that you can't understand what's going on in Israel without looking at it through a biblical lens. And that's why it's called Titus, Trump, and the Times of Israel. Look at the cover, you have the Western Wall, and then you have the Arch of Triumph, and then the symbol of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. And a lot of people ask, what is and of course, you have to understand our history. Winston Churchill once said, the farther you look back, the further ahead you can see. Titus was the general who destroyed the Second Temple. And when he destroyed the Second Temple, he claimed victory over the God of Israel. We won. Monotheism is over. Paganism won out. It's the end of the Jewish people. And he was so excited about it that he actually built what was the largest construction project of the time, the Roman Empire. The Arch of Titus was the first arch ever to commemorate the victory of war. Now it's Lyon in France and many other arches, but the only one that started it all. And it depicted the Roman soldiers carrying the menorah out of the temple and carrying all the sacraments out of the temple when they destroyed it. Because he was so happy that he actually defeated the God of Israel. Now, he thought that because he didn't know the Bible. But people who did know the Bible, people who knew the prophecy, that was just the beginning of prophecy. They knew that the Jewish people were going to be kicked out of the land of Israel and sent to the far corners of the earth, but that the same people were going to one day be gathered back from the land of Israel in the same geographic location, same language, and become a lifelong nation. And that is the difference in when you know the Bible and you don't know in Israel. So a lot of people today, they're like Titus. They look at things through a political, real politics type way, and they miss the real story because they don't know what's in the Bible. And what's interesting is that Christians who believe in the Bible are actually more qualified to understand what's going on in Israel than politicians and diplomats who don't know their Bible, because they know what God's doing in Israel. So what I try to do is I don't ignore the political and archaeological and the legal rights to land. Those are all very much go into that as well. But I show how that pales in comparison to the biblical rights to land.
Absolutely, and it's fantastic. And for those of you who have been to Rome and you've actually seen the Arch of Titus, which I was there several years ago, And it's amazing to see that they document that victory right there. And with all the questions and people, questioning the legitimacy of the Jewish right or Israel's rights to her ancient homeland, all you have to do is go to Rome. Look at the ark; it's right there where they plundered the temple and they took away, like the menorah, which is so prominently displayed in that ark. So, I have a question, Josh, because you're Jewish, you understand the important component that Christians play. What was it? What was the impetus behind writing this book, and why now?
Well, Laurie, we've been working together for over 15 years. I started the test for challenge talk in 2004, and that was the parliament that worked to build direct lines of communication and cooperation with Christians around the world. And we started something then called faith-based diplomacy, and that was the idea that if Christians took their biblical support and turned it into real political action, then we could achieve incredible things. And because of that, the House regional Israelite caucus, our first sister caucus, then we started the Israelite Foundation Grant the President. And they did 44 Israel allied caucuses all over the world, including 1,000 members of parliament. Just that, they take their biblical support and turn it into real political action. But the secret sauce of faith-based diplomacy are Christians. It's the grassroots that put pressure on their leadership to stand with Israel, on the political leadership to stand with Israel. It's not because of the Trump administration. And I think Trump in the book as a test case for what's happening. What happens when Christians get involved in political discourse? We're seeing some of the most phenomenal successes. And where everyone else in the diplomatic world and the State Department politics said all these steps would lead to death and destruction, Christians knew that it would lead to peace. And we just saw 2 historic peace deals signed. We're seeing another one happening in the next few days, hopefully with Sudan. And this is just phenomenal. But we knew that this was going to happen. That when you do it biblically correct, that's how you bring peace to the Middle East.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So you've talked about the roots of our faith, of Christian faith, the Judeo-Christian values, which we both share. Those are the roots of Christianity. Judaism is the foundation to which Christianity was birthed. So what is the response within the Jewish community about this root connectedness between Jews and Christians, especially in light of what's happening today?
Well, I think we're seeing a real coming together of Bible-believing Christians and Bible-believing Jews. So the more you believe in the Torah, the more you believe in what you call the Old Testament, the more you're likely to want to work and forge relationships with Christians, because that's what the roots of our faith come from. It comes from a source, it comes from the Bible. And that's also the foundation of both America, which is found on Judeo-Christian values. And a lot of people ask, why does the American president, all American presidents, recognize Israel as our greatest ally? Why isn't France America's greatest ally? Why isn't South Korea America's greatest ally? Why does little country unequal? The answer is that we're the only two countries founded on Judeo-Christian values. That's what brought us together. That's why we're best friends. That's why we're the greatest ally. And people who recognize that work together. And also people from a different point of view, people who understand the Bible and Jews who read the Torah and understand it, know that this is the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. We knew that God was going to send our hearts to the nations, and that the Christians will be, the nations will be bringing our children back on the backs, and 10 Gentiles will lift up one carry them to Jerusalem, or that the nations will come to Jerusalem next week for the Feast of Tabernacles. They're all part of our prophecy that we believe in. So what we're seeing is an unprecedented coming together of Jews and Christians around the world, and it's very exciting to be a part of.
Absolutely. You bring up such a great point, Josh, because most Christians don't realize in those scriptures that you just cited from Isaiah that there is an important role that the Christians play, the Gentiles play in these last days in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And that is carrying the sons and daughters, carrying the burdens of our brethren on our shoulders. That is key. And most Christians are not taught that from the pulpit. And so it's very important that Christians understand the role that they are playing. I like one of the scriptures in Isaiah chapter 11, where it talks about in the last days that Judah and Ephraim will unite together against the enemies of Israel. It is a miraculous thing that is happening, and it's happening in our lifetime. It's really amazing that God has preserved our lives for this hour, for such a time as this. It's very exciting, even though we see some of the troubling things happening here in the United States, around the globe. It's also an exciting time. And Josh, one of the things that I've been talking about is, as of late, because we've been involved in exposing, again, the indoctrination of propaganda in our history, geography, social studies, and civics textbooks, is the connectedness to those Judeo-Christian values. George Washington, Haim Solomon, very few Christians know this because we don't teach it in our history books. Of course, we are petitioning the state of Florida right now as we're reviewing civic standards to incorporate these things into, so that Christians understand that Jews and Christians have been part of the founding. There were 1,500 soldiers, Jewish soldiers, who fought in the American Revolution. George Washington, one of his dear friends, Haim Solomon, a wealthy Jewish banker, helped bankroll the American Revolution. Washington would not have won without his assistance. The Toro Synagogue in Massachusetts, when after the victory, George Washington received a letter from the congregation at the Toro Synagogue asking or telling him, Jews do not fare well after revolutions in countries. And George Washington assured them that there will be no anti-Semitism in the United States of America, that Jews will also be able to reside here peaceably under their own vine tree. So there is a history, there is a connectedness, and yes, we haven't been teaching it, but it's even more reason why your book is so important, to connect Christians to that biblical understanding so they understand why. So you also, bring up, because there's a lot of talk, Josh, about biblical prophecy unfolding before our eyes today. You talked about prophecy being fulfilled. Explain what you mean with regards to that.
Well, it's very exciting when you're trying to publish in Florida. A lot of people don't know the history of America. They don't know what it means that America has Christian values. The book, Titus Israel, I spent a whole chapter talking about that. A lot of people don't know that there was debate at the founding of America. The language should be English or Hebrew. I mean, there's a lot of exciting stories in the history of America that brings the nation together. We're seeing an incredible unfolding of prophecy before our very eyes. And this is really what's bringing Jews and Christians together. We see for the first time that the Bible is not just a historic book, history book, and it's not just an accurate look to the present, but it's also a very accurate picture of the future. And so when we see all these prophecies being fulfilled before our very eyes, it's very exciting for people who believe in the Bible. The Jewish people for 2,000 years since their exile have been praying for this day. And we get to see them. We get to see the desert bloom. We get to see Israel becoming a light on the nations through our technology. We get to see the nations coming out of Jerusalem and paying homage to the one true God. When these prophecies were written, none of that makes sense. The desert would bloom. By definition, desert can't bloom. That's what makes it a desert. It's like saying one day the sun will melt, and then all the nations are going to come up to Jerusalem and pay homage to God. At the time, people believed in God. Paganism was the prevailing religion at the time. So how did we know that? Everyone know you're talking about when you say God. When we get to Israel, there were trains and planes and boats at the time of this. So we're really seeing incredible dozens of them being unfolded right before our very eyes. The rebuilding of Jerusalem, Israel becoming a nation in a day. It's a very exciting time, and as mentioned before, unfortunately, a lot of the church competition that really, for Christians today, just like for Jews, Israel is the most exciting thing happening. It's the proof that God is real. You don't need to talk about maybe to believe in God anymore. We have proof, and the proof is Israel.
Exactly right, Josh. So well stated. You know, the last time I was in Israel was November of last year, and it's horrible that we can't go back. Every time I try to attempt to, it gets shut down again. But I was there. We were flying in to Tel Aviv, to Ben Gurion Airport, and I looked out the windows, and I was amazed at the number of cranes. To think 100 years ago, talking about biblical prophecy, to think 100 years ago, it was sand dunes. Tel Aviv was sand dunes. And to see all of these buildings and all of these cranes, of course, you know, the joke is that the new national bird is the crane. But we understand why. We see all these cranes that are all over Tel Aviv. And just in 100 years to see the miracle of all of these buildings and life bustling about in all the cities in Israel is just absolutely amazing. And biblically, you talked about the desert blooming. It's amazing because as soon as the Jews started to return to the land physically responded to her. This to me is like huge. So when we travel throughout Israel and we eat of the fruit, we eat of the produce of the land, we are actually eating biblical prophecy fulfilled. It's a miracle. It's so exciting.
One of the most exciting things to do is try to look at a satellite map of Israel. You can actually see the borders, exact borders of Israel compared to the other countries around it, just by where the trees are. The foliage and the trees make the border of Israel because our land was desert and swamp just 72 years ago, and now it's lush and clean. So Israel is beating France in one tasting competition. France has a university dedicated to the making of 1,000 years of pairing the right vine. We just started growing grapes 7 years ago, and we're killing them in the wine tasting company. We're exporting flowers to Holland. This little country in the Middle East is actually exporting flowers to Holland. When God said that when the Jewish people come back to the land, the blood of the land will rise and give up fruits and vegetables once again, we're seeing it right before our very eyes. And that's why I say, you know, if you open up the Bible and read the books of the prophets, it's amazing. And you can understand what's going on in Israel just by understanding what the prophets are talking about.
Absolutely. It's very exciting. For those of you who've never been to Israel, you have to make a plan to go. It is a trip of a lifetime. Your perspective of the Bible will forever change. You'll never read the Bible the same way because you'll see the Bible come to life as you walk through the streets of the cities, up to the Galilee, down even into the desert. It's amazing. So amazing. Moving on, Josh, I want to talk to you about the new axis in your book. You talk about the anti-Semitism virus. Talk a little bit about that because, that's the focus of our mission at PJTN is to educate Christians from a biblical perspective, giving them the history, giving them the geography, the legal rights to Israel's rights to her land. But we see this incredible increase in anti-Semitism, even at a time when truth and information is out there and it's growing and the evidence is there. Why do you think that this is happening, especially among the Christian organizations?
I think it's a lot like coronavirus, where it sparks up and then it spreads like wildfire and people don't understand where it's coming from. But really what I see where it comes from is real. So at the same time that we're seeing Jews and Christians coming together and celebrating what God is doing in Israel and celebrating the fact that these prophecies are coming to pass, there are people who in this age reject God, hate the Bible, and so for them, all things that are happening in Israel is very scary. It's a scary time. If you don't believe in God or the Bible, this is one of the scariest times to be alive. And so we're seeing traditional groups that should be supportive of Israel actually anti-Israel because of that rejection. If you look at it from a practical point of view, look at extreme atheists, extreme leftists on the university campuses and calling them from the state of Israel. It really doesn't make sense practically why they're against Israel. We're the only free democracy in the Middle East. We're the only place in the Middle East that has gender equality for men and women. Not only can women show their face in public, be educated, we get them a case of the 22nd Amendment, but they can be the prime minister of Israel, like a Golda Meir, or the speaker of the Knesset, or the head of the Supreme Court, like now with Ezra. Men and women fight side by side in the army. So you can expect the university campus to cherish that, to be for these universal rights that we hold dear, like gender equality, like freedom of religion. We're the only country in the Middle East that can bring your Bible to your Bible that no one will buy. You bring that same Bible to you're right at the airport. So why are these institutions that are supposed to be protecting human rights and incredible democracy, freedom, wonderful? Why are they the ones against the only free democracy in the Middle East? But from a physical point of view, it makes perfect sense. If you can't teach your children that there's no God and that the Bible is made up, welcome to Torah, there's a lot of times where they're very eyes in Israel. So they say, no, it's a dangerous place, it's terrible, stay away from it. They don't want you to see it for yourself. They don't want to take food by storming and come visit Israel, because the minute you're there, you see that it's a free democracy, everyone has the same rights. And there are other groups like radical Islamic people who are against Israel. From a Muslim point of view, you should be for Israel. 18% of our population is Muslim. We have the same rights as any other citizen. We have free medical care. We have free education. It's like all other citizens in Israel. Voting rights and all the other things that you spoke about. So why are they against Israel? All the other countries should be saying, hey, how come we can't vote for who we want or say what we want to the media or have freedom of media? Why don't we have a higher GDP and freedom of trade like Israel? Again, if you don't believe in the Bible, if you're saying the Bible is not true, you believe it's right, then how do you explain the prophecies are being built for the very right of Israel? And unfortunately, to the last point, one of the main groups that we're seeing standing in Israel are mainline churches who believe in replacement theology. Mainline churches are actually divesting from Israel, not Syria, where 2.5 hours drive from here, if you're Christian, you're either beheaded or forcibly converted to Islam, or you have to pay 13 ounces gold protection money that most people don't have. They're divesting from the one place where they have property rights, clergy visas, and the ability to operate in the community. Only place in the Middle East where they have freedom. That's the place they're divesting from. So from a practical point of view, again, it doesn't make sense. Why would these people in mainland against Israel, the one place they have freedom? So from a biblical point of view, it makes perfect sense, because you can't teach your children that, okay, there was a covenant between God and Abraham, now that covenant's over. And yeah, Jerusalem was great at one time, but the beads and now we got Rome. As long as God is fulfilling his covenants in Jerusalem. And so if you go to a place like Brazil, it used to be 100% Muslim. Today it's 35% Bible-believing Christian. If you ask them, why are they Bible-believing Christian? A lot of them say, because we see what God has done in Israel and we're grafted into that covenant. We want to be a part of that. And God keeps his covenant. So you have to understand that the people who are standing against Israel are actively against what the Bible says and what the God of Israel is doing. Now, if you don't care about the Bible or you don't care about Israel, then you're probably going to throw Israel as well, because you're just for freedom and democracy and things like that. But if you actively are against it, you're more free to those that not be actively against Israel. And we're seeing that often. You see these riots in the streets of America, and somehow saying death to Israel. What does Israel have to do with it? I thought this was about social justice. The reason is that they have this common enemy of these Judeo-Christian values, which they are.
Yeah, you're right, because one of the things we are seeing now with the rioting, with the anti-Semitic Black Lives Matter movement is, death to America, death to Israel. But who's encouraging and inspiring these people? We go back to Ferguson and what happened in Ferguson. It was Hamas that was training through Facebook all of these protesters in Ferguson, Missouri. But we don't connect the dots. And also for these Christian leaders, you look at, we recently produced a documentary called Boycott This. We did a segment in the film called The Tale of Two Cities. We focused on Bethlehem and Nazareth because these are two cities that Christians can relate to. And in Bethlehem, over 80% of the Christians have fled since Oslo, since the Palestinian Authority took over. Why is that? Because the Christians who were truly worshiping, devout Christians who believe their Bible, who live their Bible, just like the Christians in Africa, we see Christians being butchered by these Islamists in Africa and throughout the Middle East. We see Christian holy sites and churches being desecrated or destroyed. But we see all of this going on, and here in Bethlehem, Christians fled, and now we have a city called Nazareth where the Israeli government governs over their city, their municipality. You have Jews, Christians, and Muslims who all live peaceably together. That story never hits some of the pulpits of the pastors and the Christian churches across the country. And we know the Christian leaders at the Bethlehem Bible College, when they study and teach their students who go through their seminary, they don't teach from the Old Testament. Why? Because the Old Testament is too Zionist. And they condemn the Christians who are pro-Zion. So it's amazing to see that this is happening, even as I said earlier, even with as much truth out there, as much biblical understanding that we have out there, there are still Christians who adhere and hold to these lies that are not based on biblical truth. And as you've said clearly in this book over and over, that having that biblical understanding, that biblical foundation is what helps us to see the totality of what is going on, and even how President Trump was raised up for such a time as this. I want to move on to, because you talked about the influence of radical Islam and what we're facing, and of course the failure of replacement theology. But I want to talk about the end game. You write in your book that the end game is Jerusalem. Tell us a little bit about that from a prophetic perspective. Talk about Jerusalem being the end game in the Middle East.
Well, if Jerusalem, all I know, one of the things that people skip over is that God in the Bible, we have to pray for one thing in the whole Bible. We need to pray to God for a lot of things. We're going to Yom Kippur, and we're going before our Maker. We've got to make our case, pray for health and success. But God said, you know what? Pray for one thing for me. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And the Jewish faith teaches us the reason God tells us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem is because He wants us to keep Jerusalem close to our heart. He wants us to be focused on Jerusalem. He wants us to teach our children about Jerusalem. He wants us, no matter where we are, what we've got going on in our lives, to always be focused on Jerusalem. In fact, in Judaism, any Jew in the world 3 times a day that believes in the Bible and prays always in the direction of Jerusalem. When they get married, they say, if I forget Jerusalem, may my right hand be the tongue, may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. And the reason is because the end game, what's going to happen in Israel, is all focused on Jerusalem. Now, the other side, I understand, they know that the next part of prophecy, which is the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the coming of Messiah, is going to happen in Jerusalem. Now, Christians believe the Messiah is coming for the second time, believe the Jews that he's coming for the first time, but we both want him to come tomorrow. And that's not going to happen if we lose Jerusalem. The other side is, well, so they try to use the issue and say, what are you talking about? Jerusalem, that's not nothing to do with the Bible, that's actually a political issue. And you know what? We have a political solution. Because there's two Jerusalem. There's East Jerusalem and there's West Jerusalem. And the great news, there's two people fighting over there. Well, you give one Jerusalem to one of them, one to the other. Political solution. But that's not true because there's only one Jerusalem. And that Jerusalem is what we call today East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is where the Temple Mount is, where the Western Wall is, it's where the Old City is, it's where Garden Tomb is, it's where anything that supports the Jews and Christians actually lie in Jerusalem. Why is that the case? Is it because God said to King David, build to the east side of Jerusalem? Of course not. What happened was in the early 90s, the population grew. We started new communities in the suburbs on the west side called West Jerusalem. So when people say, let's give the Muslim community East Jerusalem and the West, they're really saying give away Jerusalem. And if we lose Jerusalem, falls on the fact that there will be peace in Jerusalem, but sure to you. The question is, are we going to go the easy way or are we going to go the hard way? Right now, we're doing what's right. Christians are getting involved, and because of Christian support, and the president said himself, he said, I'm in the embassy for you, evangelical Christians. And I'll stop a lot of people, not to me, because that's how we got the embassy and the recognition of Jerusalem from the biggest superpower in the world. We're television Jerusalem, we got the embassy. It's Christians, not countries, that are doing it. And so it's very exciting to see that. And that's the power of faith-based diplomacy. That's why the book's called Titus, Trump, and the Times in Israel, the power of faith-based diplomacy. The power of Christians get involved when they do something, when they take an action. Big things happen. And for the first time in the last years, we're seeing these amazing things happen because Christians are getting involved with biblical prophecy and turning that into political action.
Absolutely. Such a great point. So glad you bring that up. Let's talk a little bit about, because we've got just another about 5-6 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about Trump in action. You talked about the Trump doctrine. What is the Trump doctrine?
Well, really, what's amazing we started a list in 2015, Israel Foundation, of the top 10 things that we get done support from America for Israel. And our goal was in the next 5 years to get one of them done. That was our goal. Big goal. We're working on it. The last 3 years. And not biggest things we could ever. Each one would be a sea change in relation. And he said 9 of them. And he said 9 of them because the Trump doctrine is based on the idea that the base of the party are Bible and Christians who support him, and that he's going to do what his base wants. He's going to deal with it, that he's going to protect Israel. And how does he do that? What's the doctrine? Peace through strength. Take a line from Ronald Reagan. When you strengthen Israel, when you make Israel strong, that's how you bring peace. When you weaken Israel, you get war. And so what he's done is strengthen Israel to the point where now modern Arab countries are lining up to make peace with us. They want a piece of the action. They want part of this alliance with Israel and America and Bible Christians around the world and bring a new era of peace together. That's the Trump doctrine, and that's all because of the power of faith-based diplomacy.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to tell you, because we have our organization, as you well know, produces award-winning documentaries and television programs that we broadcast through our global media partners. And we hear from Christians all over the world who let us know they are praying for President Trump. They are watching what's unfolding against President Trump and against the Prime Minister of Israel. They see the connection that Bibi is being attacked and President Trump is being attacked. And they understand the role that we play. And the Christian world looks to the United States of America to take the lead in all of these issues, because we really represent freedom. We represent liberty to the rest of the world. And that's why it's so important that we as Christians vote our Judeo-Christian values when they are coming up. But we must look at what's happening around the world through that biblical lens that Josh has communicated and talked to us about. You talk also about Trump defending the covenant. Be more specific, Josh. Tell us, what is the covenant that President Trump is defending?
Well, I think that what Christians see happening in Israel is God's fulfillment of the covenant between God and Abraham. God never had an everlasting covenant that he was going to stand with Israel, and that Israel would exist, would never go down. Even if we were being dispersed, we would one day regroup and be recreated, and then he would fulfill his promise. I think because of the people around Donald Trump and like the Vice President, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, and incredible advisors like David Friedman and Arthur Snow and Paula White, I think he has a years of labor, and we're seeing it. It's really exciting.
Yeah, Josh, you bring up such a great point because, you know, we are seeing a fulfillment of history. We see a president who unabashedly upholds the biblical promise covenant that God spoke about that would be eternal. And you also rightly stated that we are both Jews and Christians are awaiting a Messiah. Yes, one for the first time and another for the second time. But the key component is that we are both waiting together. And to me, that is so profound to see this love and this camaraderie and this support, which brings me to the closing question. The blessing or the curse? What is it going to be? What would you have to say to Christians around the world who will be viewing this? What would you say to them about the blessing or the curse of not standing with Israel? Or standing?
See that it's very clear that when you stand with Israel, you're blessed, and that when you fight against Israel, you're cursed. You don't need to buy a ticket to Tehran to see what the curse looks like. Also, you know, you look in Africa, the 60s, they were destroyed, and the same countries that are now, same Christian countries that are working with us, are blossoming again, and you know, getting more economic, more stronger. You know that Kenya and Ethiopia, remember in the 80s, I'm old enough to remember, unfortunately, the South struggles were saying, send us money. There's bans. Send money to Ethiopia, send money to Kenya. Well, today you don't see those Muslims. You know why? Because they have good irrigation systems developed by Israel. Kenya is the #1 exporter of flowers in the world today. They do it in the desert with drip irrigation systems. We're blessed nations all over the world through our cooperation. And when they stand with Israel, they're being blessed. If for all the last 50 years, South Africa was the #1 economy, and then they come time to Israel. And now same year, Nigeria in Africa. And we're seeing that in East Africa, but you take any continent, any country. While America was standing with Israel and doing all those things, your economy moved in ways that you haven't seen before. Your society grew. The participation of minorities, women in the workforce. We're seeing economic lessons, but we're also seeing spiritual lessons as well. And yes, it's true we're in this time of coronavirus and it's a scary time, there's uncertainty. But I think people of faith understand that God has a plan. We see what that plan is. And better days are ahead. But that covenant is an everlasting covenant as long as we stand with it. And the best is yet to come.
Amen. Josh, thank you so much. This has been so enlightening. Thank you for sharing all of this information. I want to remind our audience, the book is Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel. You can get your copy at Amazon. And Josh, I look forward to having you back on the program and talking more about everything that is going on in Israel. This has been so amazing. And of course, we so appreciate at PJTM, we appreciate all the work that you are doing in helping to bridge this gap between our Jewish and Christian brethren, helping us to understand, the Christians to understand our role in these last days. God bless you and have a wonderful rest of the holiday. And I look forward to seeing you and greeting you in Jerusalem.
Thank you, Laurie. And that's a lot. Because it's the new year right now, I can say next year in Jerusalem, next week in Jerusalem. Hopefully I'll see you here in the Holy City.
Amen. Amen, Josh. Be well.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go back to full screen. And let me delete this. All right. All right, Candace. So if you want to go ahead and open back up and just let everybody know that they can unmute their camera and their mic and tell everybody how they can ask questions. We're going to open up to the Q&A. We've got a couple minutes of time and I'd love to hear from each one of you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you have any questions, all you have to do, there's a little bubble at the top and you can just type in your comments or unmute yourself if you have any questions. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Any questions, thoughts, or comments about Josh's remarks in his new book that he has written? I have to tell you honestly, I love the book. It reminds me of the documentary that we produced called Israel Indivisible, The Case for the Ancient Homeland. And if you all are not familiar with that film, you can actually, if you are a monthly supporter of PJTN, you can actually access that documentary on our media page on our website at pjtn.org. But in that documentary, we made the case historically, archaeologically, legally, and biblically as to why Israel has rights to our ancient homeland. And as Josh talked about in his comments that he's written about in his book about the connection between Christians and Jews in these last days during this incredible time. I see we've got 2 comments.
Yeah, those
Oh, Titus, okay.
Asking anyone if they have any questions or comments.
I'd like to ask, was everybody able to hear Josh's comments? Or was it difficult?
Couldn't hear.
I could not hear.
You could not hear. This is the second time that we've used an interview format like this where we played it back and it was hard to hear. You guys could you hear me okay?
Yes, I could hear you okay.
Yeah, for some reason the mic, the audio on the audio that Josh was using on his computer was not strong enough for whatever reason. Any other thoughts, comments?
Well, I just want, even though I couldn't hear him very much, I wanted to thank him very much for his wonderful work that he does on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people
Oh, thank you.
and our fellow Zionists.
Yeah, we're getting some feedback, Beverly.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's technology. What are you going to do?
So one thing, maybe Laurie, Beverly was saying, maybe you could summarize a little bit.
Yes, basically, without taking up the whole, doing another 30, 45 minutes, basically the book is Josh's research that he's done over the years about how President Trump is fulfilling biblical prophecy according to everything that is going on. He did mention, I don't know if you heard this, but he did mention that their organization 15 years ago when they started, they set out to do just one of the things that Trump has done. Trump was able in 3 years to accomplish 9 of the things on their organization's list to do. So the exciting thing about President Trump is he's fulfilling biblical prophecy because he actually believes the Bible, and he also understands that America is predominantly a Judeo-Christian nation, and that evangelical Christians are an important component to any election cycle. You will hear through your news outlets, they will always, as we get closer and closer to the day of the election, November 3rd, you will hear more and more media pundits who are going to be talking about the evangelical Christian vote. Well, politicians know this, but unfortunately, many politicians have taken for granted that evangelical vote, thinking that the evangelicals will support them. But it was the last election, presidential election, spoke very differently than what a lot of people anticipated. There were a lot of evangelical Christians who ended up supporting Trump. Unfortunately, like I had discussed, there was over 40 million Christian women who sat home to the detriment of our children and their future. Trump may not be the candidate that everybody is supports or likes the way he speaks or his tweeting. But one thing we know about the Bible is God is very clear. He raises up kings and he brings them down. And if you look at our nation and the curses that we were under, one of the books we have on our website called As America Does to Israel by John McTernan. It's a great book where John draws the parallels between the headlines of the newspapers and actions that the United States has taken or did take against Israel and the consequences of those actions. But since President Trump has come into office, it's amazing to see how America has even been blessed, even in the midst of this coronavirus. The economy has done phenomenally well. We've seen the economy for Hispanics and for the Black community, they're doing much better. In fact, we see the numbers even within those groups that are swaying toward President Trump. So all politicians know that the role that Christians, evangelical Christians, play in every election cycle is crucial. And fortunately, President Trump didn't just say he was going to do something and then not follow through. And that's one thing that a lot of evangelical Christians have gotten very frustrated about. And we see the evidence of that in these elections. So I want to encourage you all, if you get the chance to get the book, we are going to post this video, this webinar on our media page on the website at pjtn.org. I would encourage you, once it's posted, go back and see if you can play it again, and if it records louder than what you were able to hear as I played it back for you. It might be different on your own laptop, and you may have to wear your own headphones. But I would like to hear from you. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the conversation we had with Josh, and what you think about the book. If you do order the book and you get a chance to read it, we'd love to hear your thoughts, because we are looking at buying those books and making them available on our store page as well at PJTN. So we admire what he's doing, what Josh is doing. We completely, totally support him, and we're grateful for his perspective to help shed a little light for us as Christians in the midst of the chaos that's going on, and as we await the upcoming elections.
Laurie, could you possibly enumerate those 9 elements of biblical prophecy that Josh listed? Because I could not hear them.
Yeah, he didn't list all of them.
Oh.
He talked about the 9 components, but he did not list each one of them. So I know that one of the things was getting Jerusalem listed, moving our embassy to Jerusalem. That was one of the biggest things. And also acknowledging that the Golan Heights in Judea and Samaria are part of Israel's ancient homeland. And those were things right off the bat that Trump engaged in. And now this peace, of course, he did talk about a peace deal, and there's some controversy over that, but we're going to have to see prophecy play out, or we're going to have to see the days play out to see what actually unfolds. But President Trump has been committed to his evangelical Christian support. And of course, he being, he has grandchildren who are Jewish. His daughter converted to Judaism. She's married to an Orthodox Jewish man, Kushner. So I think he's been loyal to the people that he promised he would make some changes, he would fulfill and do. So, but I bet you those 9 items are listed in the book.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Beverly.
So Beverly Sandler said, we're so proud and grateful for Christian support. God bless all of you. Thank you, Beverly. That's so sweet.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, no other comments?
Nope.
I want to thank you all for joining me again next week. We will see you. We actually have a gal. She is called the Counterculture Mom. She will be joining us, and I hope you will tune in. She came from LA. She was an actress in Hollywood. She was involved in reviewing some of the films that were coming out of Hollywood, and she has an incredible perspective that we are going to share with you and what she is doing in her community to combat the attacks against our children, the onslaught that our children are facing, not just in their classrooms, but even through the media.
Yes,
So
you don't want to miss her. She's a firecracker.
Yeah, she certainly is. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much. God bless you all. Look forward to hearing from you, and we will see you next Thursday night.